Hello, Todd Lutnager with Interview Expert. Today I'm going to go over how you can use interviewing to moonshot your career, meaning taking your career to the next level by interviewing so well that you're able to get that job that's a stretch. Before we go there, let's talk a little bit about what our process is. So what we do is we take the thousands of possible interview questions and we minimize it down to just 14 possible answers for you. And that is what gives us the ability to really hone in and focus on those answers that we need to give to make us have highly developed answers that interviewers really resonate with. So first, let's go over what it means to moonshot. So for example, an entry-level job, getting a job, your first job, ideally it's with the largest, most prestigious company that you can get a position with in your field. That would be your moonshot, because then that gives you the ability to either move up the ranks at that company or then move to another organization, and makes it that much easier at getting the job you want at another organization. Another form of moonshotting could be if your career hits a dead end and you've got to leave the company you're with and go to another company, to be able to get that next level up and not having wasted that time at your current company, and be able to get that promotion when you make that move. Or leaving your current entity after you've just gotten a promotion to even get that next promotion after a year's time or less. So those are how we use interviewing for moonshotting our career. And it's a very important concept to understand, because you're using interviews as a tool to move your career and move up the ranks. So an overview of what I'm going to talk about today is first how I learned this interview method and the impact it had on my life. Next I'm going to go through the 14 topics so that you understand the topics that you need to learn and focus on. The third is how stories are impactful and how you really need to learn to use storytelling in your interview responses, because people resonate with stories and how valuable that is. And then finally, kind of some theory behind what job interviewers are doing and why they're asking the questions they're asking. So let's start off with my personal story. So this all started for me back when I was getting my MBA. And as an MBA first year, your goal is to be able to obtain a summer internship and gain meaningful work and experience at a prestigious employer. So for me, that was my problem. My results weren't that great. Out of 15 interviews I went through, I only received one job offer. Now, fortunately, I received that one job offer. However, it was not based on a behavioral-based interview. I received that job offer on a strategy interview, and it was kind of a one-off oddity that this company had elected to use a strategy type interview rather than a behavioral-based interview. But I excelled at that interview and was able to then, I guess if you'd want to say, stay alive for the next year. So that summer, I started thinking about it, because this obviously bothered me that I performed so poorly at interviewing. And so I thought about how I could put myself in the driver's seat. So what would that take, and what would that look like? So I realized when I was interviewing and telling stories to the interviewers, that I was doing well. So that summer I spent time going through the stories that I had been telling and kind of refining them, because at times during the previous year, when I was telling the stories, occasionally I would run into snags where I wasn't putting myself always in the greatest light. So I reworked those stories to make sure that all the details involved in the story were furthering my goal of obtaining a position with that firm. And my next year, doing the storytelling strategy that I came up with, I perfected my interviews, and I came up with the results of 5 out of 12 job offers per interview. So I greatly increased my success rate. And of people in my class, that was probably the greatest percentage of interviews to job offer ratio, of people I went to school with that interviewed at least 10 times or more. So from there, though, this whole strategy was almost lost because the famous Deming quote, if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't really know what you're doing. And that was me. I had these stories that I was telling. It worked. I kind of got my job offers that I needed, and I was kind of done with the whole interview process and my interview methodology. Well, then I went back to work with some friends of mine, and we've developed about 6 different companies that we have. And in that role, I had to develop the interviews for the different job functions because I had taken some HR classes in my MBA program, knew about pay bands, and a little bit about interview methodology from my studies. But I went into much more in depth on how to actually interview people and what I should be looking for and the theory behind it. So this is how I came up with the ability of reduction, of taking the infinite number of interview questions or thousands of interview questions and reducing it down to just 14 answers, which makes it manageable for you to then go through and perfect those stories to make it so that you're able to interview at a very high level. So this takes me back to another Deming quote that says, it's not enough to do your best, you must know what to do and then do your best. What I think is important here is us providing a strategy then provides you the ability then to know how to do your best and implement the strategy that we're teaching you. This gives us the ability to use our method for moonshotting and being able to really advance your career. So let's go over the things or what the interviewers are testing and how these interviews that they're testing these topics resonate the world over. So from a 10,000 foot view, the interview tests for the same 3 things. A, decision making, B is leadership, and 3 is the ability to adapt and change. So those are the 3 things that an interviewer is testing for. Let's talk about decision making for a minute. So decision making, obviously at the CEO level, a CEO can make just a couple major mistakes in a year, and it may have the impact of either long-term crippling the company or could even drive it into bankruptcy. So obviously a CEO has to make very good decisions or have very good decision making. However, the same is true for people further down the line. Every person is constantly making decisions on behalf of their employer, and the culmination of those decisions determines whether the company is going to succeed or make money on a monthly basis. So even at your line level, level, if those people aren't choosing to make decisions to further the organization along, it's going to impact the organization. And that's why as interviewers, we test decision-making skills. And that's important. So the 4 topics that they will ask or they will try to focus in on for decision-making is, can you creatively solve problems? How can you make a process better? How do you go about making decisions? And then finally, let's give you a decision to make here in the interview and how would you go about doing it? So those are kind of the 4 different areas or topics for decision making, and employers like to use that to try to find out where someone's decision making skills lie. The second is leadership. The reason leadership is important, obviously, is because the people that you hire today, even if they're at a very low level, can continue up the ranks, and at some point they can become the future leaders of the company. Also, leaders just kind of naturally correct problems without having to take them all the way up the chain of command, using valuable resources of the company. So therefore, leaders just make their environment better for all. So the 3 major areas of topics that an interviewer is going to ask about leadership is, How would you manage others? How do you perform on a team? And do you help to develop other people? So those are the three things that are cared about when they're looking for insights as to your leadership potential. The third is the ability to adapt and change. And if we look at this, people now so more than ever before, people are hired into a role in a company, but even in that role that they're initially hired for, there may be other things that person has to do, or that person may end up a year from now in a completely different position that they weren't expected to be in. And in that situation, that person needs to have the ability to adapt and change in order to further that organization. So the ability to adapt and change, there's actually 7 different topics here. The first one is, can you properly deal with friction between yourself and another person? Second is, can you identify what is important and cope with stress? Third is, do you think about improvement, or do you just do this tasks that are assigned? Fourth is, can you account for your weaknesses? Fifth is, how do you deal with failure? Sixth is, what keeps you excited about the work environment that you're in? And then seventh, what is your risk tolerance? So those are all the key elements that an employer is looking at when they're developing or kind of making a case for whether a person has the ability to adapt or change. So now let's go into storytelling a little bit, and the reason why storytelling is so impactful. So if I told you a story today, the likelihood of you being able to remember some of the details of that story just a few days from now is much greater than if I just give you a laundry list of items and expect you to remember it. I think a great example of storytelling is Sir Isaac Newton and the apple falling out of the tree and hitting him in the head, and that's how the theory of gravity was developed. We all think of Isaac Newton as somebody who just kind of got lucky and walked into the theory of gravity, but in reality he was one of the greatest mathematicians of all time, and he actually was the one that developed calculus, or is seen as the father of calculus. So you have the story about hitting the apple accidentally hitting the man from underneath while he's sitting underneath a tree. And you can see how this lessens his impact. So we don't ever want our stories to be non-impactful because we lucked into a good result. So we always have to have a reason or rationale that a good result occurred in our story, and it wasn't left up to luck. So that's a tip for storytelling. So within our stories, we're going to employ a tactic which we like to call traits. Now, traits are the little nuances in each story that the interviewer is actually looking for to determine if your behavior, kind of what was seen, is going kind of above and beyond, or if you have skills that are above and beyond the normal person, what the normal person would do. We call these traits. So in these traits, we like to mark the path of our story with these traits, so they're very easy for the interviewer to follow and pick up on, and that way the interviewer can give us the maximum points for the question they're asked, and provide us with the maximum impact for our stories. So basically what we're doing is we're putting these traits in our stories to basically serve up to the interviewer on a silver platter what they really care about. So now we're going to go into how Interview Expert's Easy Ace product works. So if we go and log into our Interview Expert Easy Ace product, we can see there's a video at the top, and that video will explain to you how to use the process. But here I'm going to show you how this works. So we're going to go under decision making. The first one is creative problem solving. What is your greatest achievement? So if we click on that, we can see the question at the top, what is your greatest achievement? The core concept is achievement. And then we can see that there are these traits. There are actually 17 different traits present. However, we only need 3 to 4 of these different traits kind of littered in our story to make it so that our story is impactful. So we're going to focus on these traits at the beginning before we create our story, so that we have them as present of mind when we're making the story. So this makes it easier than having to go back later after the fact. Now, We have a story assessment meter. This is just going to make sure that we get 3 to 4 traits in our story, so it's kind of a reminder for us. Then we have the core concept and explanation video. The reason we have the explanation video is it's obviously some people are more visual and like to just watch the information. Having it written out as the core concept is useful if you're in a situation where you can't listen to the audio, but you would still like to go over the core concept and the principles involved in that question type. Additionally, we have 3 sample answers. The first one is for a recent college grad. The other 2 will be at a more professional level. And if we click on these insight analysis and performance, those traits will then appear in red throughout the story, so we can see how the traits are kind of incorporated into the story and the impact that they have for the interviewer. Next, there'll be a tip. For this module, there's only 1 tip, but in other modules, there may be 2, 3, or 4 tips. And this goes through a tip that we just want to make sure you have present of mind. It may not be important for your story. However, it may have impact when you're in front of the interviewer and they ask a follow-up question. So therefore, we have tips because it'll help you think about some of the questions that the interviewer may ask you about. Now I'd like to go over our story builder. The story builder, its purpose is to make it, to basically reduce the amount of time it takes to put your stories together. So it's going to follow the STAR method, situation, task, action, result, and kind of go through helping you build those stories by making it so you have to brainstorm less and you can kind of actively get into the meat of what you're trying to do, rather than spending a lot of time sitting around thinking about how to come up with a story. And we click the various buttons as we are selecting them throughout the story builder. Here we click on the traits we want to add, and then what we feel like we learned from the story. We hit submit, and then as you can see under the story builder, it generates kind of an outline result of your story. Then you'll have to go back through and fill in the details and kind of make it all mesh together. You have the option of saving the story or emailing the story to yourself. Beneath that, we have the similar questions that this question could be interchanged for. This helps you prepare yourself for when you're actually live firing with an interviewer, to know that you'll have to maybe make some minor adjustments to your responses with the interview at the beginning of the story before you go through your whole story with the interviewer. So that's our interview process. You repeat that 14 times and you should have your stories built. And then it's just a matter of kind of refining your storytelling skills and practicing with other people or practicing in front of a mirror until you've refined your stories till you're almost to the point where you're just acting them. And that's when you know you're ready for interviewing. Now, hopefully this has been impactful or helped you understand more about the interview process and how you can minimize your preparation time. So we have a couple different options for you. The first is our workbook. The workbook is the initial book that Mark Ryan and myself came up with to teach people how to interview. The workbook still works great, and a lot of people buy the workbook with the other lessons that we have and think that it's helpful for that. The downside of the workbook is that it's a lot less efficient with your time. You can expect to spend about 3 times the amount of time working through the workbook as it would take as using one of our other methods. The Easy Ace coaching, the online methodology, a lot of people just use that and get through, and then they find other people to help prepare them when it's time for live fire interviewing, because you really need to have someone ask you interview questions. That's the best way to prepare. Now, the next level up, we inject some live one-on-one coaching. And why we feel like this is really important is because A, you're getting a grade, so you're knowing whether you're at the point where the coach thinks that you're ready to go, or whether you need more work. Also, you're getting to refine your stories, which is very important, because getting to refine your stories makes it so that they're going to be better and making sure you're hitting all the traits properly. And then finally, you're going to find out about any blind spots you have. So for most people, one-on-one coaching session, works and is fairly adequate. For someone that struggled the last time and obtaining their last position, or somebody who's going for a interview that's going to be very impactful, could be a potential executive or something like that, we recommend typically 3 coaching sessions where you can be coached, and then you can then work on what you were coached on, and keep going through that process for refinement until you're totally ready to interview. So those are the offerings that we have. So hopefully we've taught you how you can minimize the amount of work that it takes to interview at a high level, and you don't actually have to know the answer to thousands of questions, which a lot of times leads people to not prepare. And us providing you with this overall strategy, we believe gives you the ability to minimize the amount of work while still going after moonshot job opportunities. So thank you for coming to our webinar today, and let us know if you have any questions, and feel free to send us an email or a response on the webinar if you do. Thank you.